Healthcare workers from Newfoundland and Labrador have arrived in Ontario to help ease the COVID-19 load in that province. 3 doctors, 5 nurses, and a nurse practitioner are all volunteers. They describe themselves as a small but mighty team with lots of experience on the COVID front lines. They'll help Toronto area hospitals deal with the surge in critical care cases. One of those volunteers is Dr. Allison Furey, the wife of the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador.
It's an opportunity to help our people, and they've cried out for help. I've followed my colleagues up there, and they're struggling, and they have been for over a year. So if I can go and relieve somebody up there of their, give them some reprieve, then I'm happy to do that.
Well, Dr. Andrew Furey is the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. He is also a physician, an orthopedic surgeon who, along with his wife, has been to many medical missions overseas, and he is with me now. Thanks so much, Premier, for taking time to speak with me. Look, we've just heard from your wife, Allison Furey, Dr. Allison Furey, about her reasons for volunteering to help out in Ontario. You know, Newfoundland and Labrador has a tradition of punching above its weight at a time of crisis, and I'm wondering how long did you have to think about answering this call for help from Ontario?
Well, not very long at all. As soon as we heard the call, I made the call to Premier Ford and said, look, I know we're small, but we're mighty, and any way that we can help, whether it's in supplies or with personnel, we're happy to help. I think we know that COVID-19 doesn't recognize provincial boundaries. We recognize that this is a Canadian issue, and we're all Canadian, and we need to be able to contribute to that family atmosphere when we can to help our brothers and sisters, regardless of where they live in this beautiful country. So we were happy to help, even in a small way. But this little bit of help is a little bit of hope, and hope begets hope. And I think that's something that we all need a bit of right now as this COVID-19 pandemic wears long.
You and your wife have been part, I touched on it, of medical missions to countries racked by poverty or crisis. And I'm wondering how you think, how do you think this is different when you have to do it for your own country?
Well, I mean, it's obviously very different when you're operating in a low and middle income country compared to a G7 country. I mean, the challenges are much different. The fact that I could pick up the phone and talk to Premier Ford and have this organized so quickly and so efficiently, recognizing the medical skills and the capacity that we have to execute on this in a short period of time is remarkable and speaks to the Canadian nature of this crisis that we're all facing, and the fact that we should be able to rely on our neighbors to help in tough times. It's very different than when you're on the ground, just say after the earthquake in Port-au-Prince, or in the refugee crisis on the border of Bangladesh and Myanmar. Like, those are different scenarios. But I will say what the common thread through amongst them all, what I anticipate will be, is that both will stretch your personal capacity, your professional limits, and the only way you can get through those stressful, anxious times is being able to lean on your neighbors, to lean on your team member, and this is a Team Canada approach, and the fact that Ontario is leaning on Newfoundland and Labrador right now, symbolically, but also in terms of the individual medical professionals, I think will lend a helping hand that's much needed. You're
sending a medical team of 9 people. That doesn't seem like a big number, but how much of a difference will that group make?
Well, certainly I've experienced that small teams can have big impacts. This is just the start, and if the numbers stay the way they are here in our own jurisdiction, then we're looking at potentially providing more. But small teams can have a big impact. We know that the medical professionals on the front line there have been working and are exhausted. So when you go into an environment where, in a crisis environment where the system is strapped, the personnel are strapped, they're exhausted, and having that little extra bit of support to be able to take a shift, to be able to take a week to 2 to 3 weeks of shifts away from someone so that they can recoup, be energized, and come back is incredibly important. And we've seen that. I've seen that myself on the ground in Port-au-Prince, and seen how a short, small, impactful team can make an incredible difference. Of course, it's not going to change the overall landscape, but that shouldn't be the message. The message is really about helping our neighbors and helping the individual patients in that particular moment in time.
And I don't think you can overestimate, right, the notion of turning around in a crisis and seeing someone you're not used to seeing, but someone who's got your back from another part of the country.
Yeah, and you know, this is, again, it's a Canadian issue. It's not a issue that's unique to Ontario. I mean, Ontario is facing the most recent surge, but this could happen to anyone tomorrow. The only thing that we know that for certain is the uncertainty with respect to COVID-19, and so I'd like to think that as Canadians, we're all in this together, and we should help each other when we're facing challenging times with respect to this pandemic. And I'm very proud of the Newfoundlanders and Labradorians that put their hand up to help. Newfoundland and Labrador has always risen to the challenge, and as Premier and as a physician, I'm incredibly proud that they're now answering this call on a federal stage in a medical capacity.
What happens if your COVID cases in your province surge there? Will you call them back?
Absolutely, and that's been a condition on these teams with Premier Ford and with the Prime Minister. And Minister LeBlanc has said, you know, of course, we're willing to help, but if things change, and they can change, we'd have to recall medical professionals here if there is a change in our own epidemiology here at home. And everyone's, of course, is completely understanding of that.
There have been some questions raised in your province. The nurses union there says, you know, has been pushing your government to deal with ongoing staffing shortages in parts of the province. What do you say to them? Some people are wondering, how can you spare those workers for Ontario if you have a nurses shortage in your province? Yeah,
sure. The nurses union has been supportive of this initiative, but it's a false equivalent. It's, you know, because you know, there's an acute crisis now happening in Ontario. There, of course, is issues ongoing in our medical system with nursing shortages, as I'm sure there are in many jurisdictions across the country. And we will endeavor as a government to address those with medium and long-term solutions. But there's not to say that because one issue is occurring and another issue is occurring that you can't deal with both at the same time. And that's where that false equivalence kind of comes in. That said, we will endeavor to work with the nurses union to work through the nursing shortage staffing issues that occur throughout the province to address that in a more definitive way. That's been a chronic issue that's been facing this province for a while.
All right. Premier Andrew Furey, good to talk to you, Premier. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Peter.